So I guess I probably should take a step back and explain where Project Me came from. So 7 years ago, my life spectacularly imploded. I lost my husband, health, and career in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. So absolutely everything that I had worked hard for, invested time, money, energy, love into, just literally was gone. Indeed, my then 4-year-old nephew said to me, "Auntie Lollipops," aka me, "now that Uncle Chris is dead, you have nothing," he said.
Oh, okay.
So maybe you can out of the mouths of babes and all that. Anyway, it's fine. He was going to look after me for 100 days. But when you're 42, 100 days, well, that was going to get me to about March. So needless to say, I was going to have to sort myself out. But I think that at the time, the world was really busy. I felt like I was wading through treacle in a parallel universe to absolutely everybody else. And I had to find a space to breathe, a space where I could hear my own voice that was going on in my head. People give you all these useful suggestions. My mother in particular was, "Well, why don't you go back to ballet?" Ballet was not exactly going to save my life. So needless to say, I flew myself 5,000 miles away in search of sunshine, because I am really a sunshine kid and I like being in the sun. Not really knowing where I was going other than it was guaranteed sunshine. So you can imagine my surprise when I got off the plane and the taxi driver goes to me, "And welcome to Aruba, the happy island." And I'm thinking, there's an irony in that, because obviously I wasn't necessarily terribly happy at the time. And so there I sat doing absolutely nothing for the holiday brochures, bawling my eyes out on a sun lounger on a beautiful, beautiful island. But yeah, I kind of was like, where do I go for now? Where do I go now from here? I knew I couldn't return back. I wasn't ready. So after 2 weeks, I didn't get back on the plane. I actually ended up staying in total 7 weeks. And I don't even know where these questions came from, but I literally just wrote these 3 questions down in a sketch pad, which is what I've been kind of doodling on, I guess. And it was, who am I now? What matters most to me now? And what do I want to feel? And I wanted to feel truly alive, to feel free, to not feel restricted by things. And that set in motion a whole series of questions that I was asking myself about, what do I want life to look like?
Yeah.
Really starting with myself and who was I? And that collectively was called what I called Project Me.
Okay.
So for the remaining 7 weeks, I furiously was writing and planning, because I felt it was the only skill I'd actually got left, was my ability to business plan. So in short, I business planned my life. I'm not sure that was necessarily what I was entirely thinking at the time, but I had to create something from nothing. I knew I couldn't go back to the unhelpful coping strategies I'd had and used in the past, because, I had, following a water skiing accident when I was 13 and lost my mobility back then, my solution had been a severe eating disorder, which then became bigger than the original problem. But I didn't know how to handle that. That then saw me, taken into hospitals where I spent 7 months overcoming that. But all I did was replace it into working harder and doing more. Oh. So, and that didn't kind of work either. So I knew this time I had to do something different. And okay. Project Me was something different, because I started with myself.
But your start with Project Me came about because of your life either imploded or exploded. It just kind of fell apart. I mean, everything that you thought, that you had, which was just normal, I'm coasting, things are okay.
Yeah.
Truthfully, for you, it all imploded. So everything kind of fell apart all at the same time. And so that's hard for anybody to deal with, if you're dealing with death or loss or whether it's family or job or anything, you just had a lot of things going on at one time,
Yeah.
but then you ran away.
Yeah.
So you didn't try to, you didn't face it at the point. You said, I'm out of here. So you fly all the
I
way
don't
to
know.
Aruba.
I'm going to beg to differ with you on that one, Pete. And do you know what it is? It is something that I have been told many times, that I have run away, or having an eating disorder is avoiding it. Actually, no.
But you literally left and went to Aruba.
Yeah, because I actually needed to hear my own voice.
Okay.
And I think that's the subtle difference. Is everybody around me was, oh, you should do this. This is what you should do. Oh, get back into doing this. And I'm going, I have done life in the way everybody else has told me I should do it. Where did that get me? It got me an eating disorder. It got me as a complete workaholic. And yeah, I have been, do not get me wrong, that despite all of these things, I had an immensely successful career. I have traveled all over the world courtesy of the jobs and the careers I've had. So, I'm very fortunate. But that said, it's a lot of that. I wonder how much is because that is what you should do, what life is expecting you to do. And there's somewhat of, this sort of ascending of the normal expectation path that we're supposed to follow.
No, but you're right, because I have conversations with a lot of other people, and the story is very much the same. And so whether or not it's your parents or your spouse or teachers or whatever your circle is, there's everybody saying something about how life should be, what you should be doing, and what their perspective is based on what they either know about you or know about your talents or know about your personality. And so sometimes we just try to live up to the expectations of others, and there isn't that authentic conversation as to, Laura, let's find out who you are and what you want, even from a young age.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I really observe is that what if at school we were really explored this idea of who we are and what matters most to us at a point when we're in amongst our peers, so we can actually hear what other people are saying, what our contemporaries are saying, and we can recognize the differences, but also acknowledge the similarities in a space that's, structured, because of course, we've talked before about how school is structured, but in a way that is allowing people to explore safely these things.
Right.
I certainly feel for me, it would have been a huge difference. And I'm absolutely convinced I wouldn't have had to go through as much pain in my life as I have done to get to the point I did to do what I'm doing now. Because at the end of the day, the only constant in life is from the moment that we're born to the moment we die is ourselves.
Right.
So
we have to live with ourselves.
We need to get to know ourselves pretty well, don't we?
Yeah, we need to connect with that. Yeah,
without a doubt. And we can't live on the expectations of our parents because they failed to do something in their lives, and therefore they want to make sure that their child is excelling in themselves, or that society says that this is what you should do because success looks like that. But success is different for everybody.
Right.
And I suppose for me, Project Me was very much about recognizing this idea that I actually wasn't connected with myself. That I'd kind of gone on this journey, I'd done everything properly, in inverted commas, and I use it loosely. And what if that really got me? My husband was still dead. I'd still lost my health, and I still didn't have a career. And yes, I'd done some amazing things, but there was still something that Dr. Gabor Maté talks about, this trauma being this disconnection of the self. I don't know whether it necessarily has to be trauma as a horrific event necessarily, but where you recognize that you're not quite aligned with something inside, creates this internal angst. And I can only describe it as, I can sense it inside now when I'm not aligned with who I am, what matters most to me, and this sensation that I want to feel. And for me, as I say, it's this feeling of being alive and that I am free and unrestricted.
So what, because I know that you talk to other people about this, that is kind of your mission now, that you want to turn your pain into passion, and that is helping others find that life that's inside of them. So what does that feel like? Because you mentioned that before, you want to feel a certain way, you want to feel alive, but what does feeling alive feel like to you?
So I suppose for me, it is living life on my terms, I guess, which doesn't mean I'm breaking loads of rules. But so, if I think about how you and I got to meet in the first place, was I reached out to you because you wrote a post.
I made a post because I simply said I'm a misfit. I belong to different groups, but not 100% in any one group. And so I can't align with a niche, I can't align with a niche market. So in order for me to align myself with my passion, I just I started having conversations with people and just being authentic. I enjoy the conversations. The conversations are powerful. Last week I talked with Reverend Barbara Michaels, and we talked about how humor is part of healing. And you're talking to me now about just realigning yourself to go from a point of disconnection to a point of reconnection, in order to feel whole, which is just powerful.
No, absolutely. And I think, it is that whole, as you say, it's this niche thing that, society wants to put us in a box that fits nicely so that everybody can understand it. Yeah, actually, but that also, the box has a label on it. And, I have many labels, but actually, who am I? And similar to you, I love to have, I could say it's a window into someone else's world so that I can begin to understand and to learn. Some would say it's curiosity, but through those conversations, they're so rich. That is what I love about, living unrestricted is, okay, so I send you an email and you might turn around and go, I'm not really interested, which you didn't, because we're here having this conversation now. But it's just that freedom to do that.
Right.
And almost a comfort in I don't know whether that's quite how I would describe it, but a comfort in myself, having this sort of sense of intuition deep within inside me that I really know who I am beyond the labels. And I think that's what people are really not in tune with. And so they can tell you, a lot of the clients I work with, stumble over the question, who am I? We go from, well, I'm a daughter, I'm a widow, I'm a career woman, and I'm a businesswoman, or I'm a father, and but who are you? What, if I said to you, what do you want to feel? Or when you feel this thing, what are you doing? That's a wholly different question. That's when you light up. That's when you become, you attract very different energies into what you're doing. And I suppose that for me is the idea of living unrestricted. And I think and doing things that I was passionate about. I knew for me, out of doing the work with Project Me and really coming to terms with the challenges of the past, kind of doing the whole reconnecting with myself and really working on who am I? What does actually bring me alive? I have literally changed every single aspect of my life. There is nothing that is the same from 7 years ago.
Okay.
That's not to say it's been easy.
Well, it can't be easy. So going from a point of disconnection, and sometimes and I'm going to just go back just a little bit from what you just kind of said, in that in order to define who am I, sometimes it's a very straightforward question. We tend to think it may be, but we don't use, where we don't have the words, and where we don't use the words regularly enough to really answer the question, because it we look at titles, you know,
Yes.
we look at roles and responsibilities. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a pet owner. I own a dog, cat,
Yeah.
and a hamster. I'm a father, right?
Yeah.
And all those, you know, I'm a teacher, all those things. But then to really say, well, those are your responsibilities. So talk to me about you, you know. Well, you know, that's when we start talking about, you know, well, what are we passionate about? What type of books do we like to read?
Yeah.
What inspires you to do something? What gets you
Yeah.
up out, you know, out of bed in the morning? You know, embrace the reality of, I enjoy, I'm a runner, but no, I enjoy running. It's
Yeah.
actually something I enjoy doing. So I could say I'm a runner. I'm a book reader. I enjoy diving into a book and getting lost in the thoughts that are prompted from the writer, right?
Yeah.
Because I want to be inspired, whether it's
Yeah.
fiction, not fiction, or whatever. And so it's framing that, using different vocabulary, using different thoughts to answer the question, who am I? Right?
Absolutely. And you make a really good point. You know, you say, you know, you're a runner, you're a dog lover. Those things ultimately are transient. You know, you're not going to be necessarily your father's status will evolve. There'll be a point at which you're less of a father parent because you'll have transferred into father because you have adult children.
Right.
But you, as who you are, your love of diving into a book and being inspired by what's written on the pages, that doesn't change. You may become more passionate about it because, you know, you've read more, you've honed in more about where your direction's going. You know, my love of learning has been there since an early age. You know, I used to be the one, you know, and I still have them now. You know, my mother gleefully gave me all my little projects that I used to do when I'd go on holiday, and I'd write a little project, I would stick in my postcards and I'd write something every single day, you know, and I loved learning about things. That hasn't changed. You know, I have a library of books that, yeah, okay, so I haven't read them all, I give you that, but I have read
Right.
quite a number of them because I just love to understand that has never disappeared. That's not got a, what do you call that? That's not got a label to it. I'm still passionate about it.
Right.
And it's part of who I am.
Right. So with all that, your project Me then transforms into your passion to help others. And so
Yeah.
is it, and like I said, I have conversations with people, and I'm not trying to influence or change, or I just really want to learn and learn how they're impacting their world. So the conversations that you have with people, how are you impacting their world? How are you helping them make those changes? And, you know, is there a secret to changing, or is it really, do you tell the people that you work with, this is going to hurt? Sometimes it's going to hurt a lot, because we're actually transforming into something different.
Yeah,
How,
I know.
how does that conversation start?
I think there is, I guess it's, to answer it very succinctly, it's quite hard because every client comes to me in a slightly different place in their
Right.
journey.
Right.
So, but ultimately, for long-term change to happen and transition to a new place, you have to acknowledge, you have to see where you're at, because you have to make the invisible visible, because if you don't, those things are going to just hold you back, and before you know it, you're going to end up being in a potentially repeating pattern that is unhelpful. So cue why it took me so long to overcome an eating disorder, because I hadn't really acknowledged back when, you know, 30 years ago. So that part can be filled with a lot of tears. and pain because we have to acknowledge the impact it's had on its life. But in acknowledging it, we've made it visible and we can start doing things about it. So, you know, I know for some, they've had, it may be a grief right now that's happened, but that's triggered off an event from, say, 10 years previously that's been lying, simmering under the surface. But it's actually the real cause of why the grief now is just so painful. And they recognize that they have to make some quite big, bold steps. But there's a way to do it. You know, I'm not going to go, look, throw you straight in with the lions and, you know, just let's see whether you're going to sink or swim. You know, there's ways to do it. You know, you can test and we practice, you know, the whole use of language and how perspective taking and how when you talk about your own feelings, they are your own feelings. No one can take those away from you. So when, especially in a difficult conversation, you know, it's very easy to say, you made me feel like this, you know, but you've got to have that difficult conversation in order to move forward. But if you turn it on its head and say, I hear how you feel, but I don't feel the same way, and that really hurt me because that person was particularly special to me, or I would have hoped our friendship meant more, whatever the particular situation might be. But when we place it into how it makes us feel, it is our feelings. Because what can the other person turn around and say? You can't have those feelings. Yes, I can, because they're mine. Right. And so, do I call that painful? It depends which is the worst pain. I think for many, the worst pain is sitting where they are right now.
Well, transition is painful because we have to give up. It's like grieving. We have to give something up. Because sometimes we hold on to these angsts, as you say, because we're comfortable with them. I mean, they might not be good for us, but it's all we know. And to transition into something different, even though it's better, it's still different. And different is scary.
Yeah, different is always scary. Because we kind of, even though it's negative, perhaps, we're kind of comfortable with, because we kind of know what it looks like.
Right, yeah.
And also, you know, if we get rid of that, it's going to be a space. What do we do with a space? You know, it's like...
literally.
And people don't know what to do with that space. And so again, that's
so they got to fill it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but filling it with that negative stuff feels more comfortable than going, I've got some space. What can I do with that space? How can I move forward? And so, you know, for me, it is about building that balance. And so I kind of talk, you know, I've talked about sort of the identity bit, the who am I? You know, there's the recognition that you've kind of got to acknowledge because you've disconnected, there's an angst, an internal angst. Then, you know, you start to recognize that you're not quite the same person anymore. Something's happened, you've evolved. And then it's that whole thing of, you know, finding your path and kind of recognizing what does that look like. And this is what we're starting to talk about is, you know, okay, so I've kind of let that go. I'm healing from that. It's not an overnight job. I get that because things will sideswipe us just because we weren't expecting it to impact us. But I've started to find my own path and I'm starting to move forward. And with little steps, I'm actually gaining in my confidence to see where this is going. And we don't necessarily need to have the whole path. You know,
we can't,
Absolutely. I mean, I take, you know, the room I'm sitting in now. This was going to be my calm oasis, away from the busyness of the outside world, filled with flowers, friends, family, and fun. Well, I can absolutely reassure you that 3 years ago, I would have actually been sitting probably a metre further downwards. I'd have been looking up all the way to the loft because this house had been gutted and the back wall didn't exist. And my builder was busily telling me, I'm really sorry, Laura, I'm bankrupt. And oh, by the way, 30 grand is missing and you don't have any windows.
Oh my gosh.
You know, but that's where I sat there. My vision was still intact. How I was going to make those steps, I didn't know, granted. But again, that's where I drew on Project Me. And you know, who I was, how I wanted to deal with this, what mattered to me. So it mattered to me that he'd come and told me that, and he hadn't run away.
Good.
We just worked out a different way. Hence why I'm sitting in in this room, and it does have flowers in it, not that you can see them. And it is my calm oasis. And I didn't apply loads of pressure on myself. I did actually still work with the same builder, and we found a way forward. But had I got lost in all of the it's his fault, my fault, anger, negativity, and not stuck to Project Me and kind of really what was the core of who I was and what I affectionately refer to as my brand me, I think I would have got sucked into it, as I watch so many other people do. But no, I sit here 3 years on, and you know, I have found my path, as it were. But I think this, you know, I make the point, you know, specifically about those things is because that was what 4 years after creating Project Me. And so often when we're talking about transition, you know, people say there's 3 stages. But in actual fact, I think there's one very important stage that we forget, is that it's not an overnight job. And, you know, and therefore you have to have the recognition that taking your pain to your passion and purpose takes time, takes and requires support, you know, looking after yourself, you know, to keep you going. It's not, and you know, my situation with my house was exactly that. You know, I had to think hard about, okay, well, what's going to keep me going? And as I say, you know, it's not a case of I created this vision, I bring in the builder, he starts today, 6 months later it's finished. That's just not how life works. Well, certainly it's not how mine's ever worked. I'd love to say it was, but you know.
But what you just said is important. But for you, when this transition started 7 years ago, you were alone.
Yeah.
You were alone. And so you had to take up, you know, all, you know, you said we needed support and we need other things, but you started your transition alone. And that's probably rather significant. Well, one, you recognized there needed to be something different. 2, you didn't like the way you felt and you went to feel differently. And 2, you really wanted to define and be able to talk about who, and answer the question, who am I?
Yeah.
But you're now a coach and helping people along that transition path, that growth path.
Yeah.
How did you, my question is really about you. How did you make it alone for so long that you kept the motivation going? Because that itself could have been difficult.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, when I say I was alone, look, don't get me wrong, I have family around me. Just to give some context, I have a sister with 4 kids and a very, you know, she has a very high-powered job. So, you know, time is never on her side. I have a brother who has 2 children. One has complex needs. So, you know, slightly preoccupied. And at the time, my mother, put it like this, my father was in late stage blood cancer. So he died actually 11 months after my husband. So she was preoccupied. So there were people around, but actually I'd also say they weren't always necessarily helpful. As I say, ballet was not going to save my world.
Right.
But what I did recognize, absolutely to your point, was the need to find somebody to help me with momentum and motivation.
Okay.
The problem I had for me personally was that support wasn't out there. I didn't want to see a counsellor because the bottom line for me was no amount of talking was going to actually change anything. You know, there's only so many rounds you can talk about the fact that my husband had died and he wasn't coming back. Right. You know, I could sit there and do, how is that going to be? I'm not saying it's not important to talk or to share your feelings, not at all. And there was nothing really out there for the kind of support I needed. I was very fortunate in the end because actually one of the counsellors who I had a free trial with sent me off to have a conversation with a therapeutic coach. She hadn't necessarily got the field of expertise that I was looking for. But that said, she was able to help me, support me with delivering my Project Me and keeping my momentum and motivation going.
Okay.
So ultimately, 7 years on, I have created the space that I didn't have back then.
You became the person that you needed to find. Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot too when I talk to people, because there isn't that person, either they couldn't find or wasn't there or didn't exist in whatever space. And so they transform themselves into that person that they were looking for in order to keep that growth and momentum and, you know, that transition going. So I hear that a lot too.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. You know, I think people say to me, are you a counselor? Are you a coach? Are you a therapist? I've actually trained in
all that,
almost the whole gambit, really. And I use it as required, pending, you know, where the client is and what their need is. You know, the work I do is so bespoke because I think that's what's required in order to truly flourish through that transition. So for me, as I say, it wasn't available to me at the time, and I did look, and you know, what I had access to, she was amazing, but again, still not quite what I needed at the time. And obviously I had Project Me, so it was very much really she was there to support me delivering my Project Me, whereas had somebody, you know, Project Me isn't a defined process, it's just us really uncovering who we are. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that it's a blueprint that I sit here and go like you start at 1 and you finish at 10. It's not like that at all. Don't misunderstand me on that front. But you know, for me, it is the difference that makes the difference for me, having basically, as I said earlier on, completely change my life in every single aspect. There is not one piece that is the same 7 years on.
So what's next? What's next for Laura?
So what's next for Laura? Well, I suppose I don't know. I think there will be a book there somewhere.
Okay.
not just a short ebook, but and you know, to tell of all the stories of, you know, the crazy things that I've, you know, managed to still get up to despite life.
Well, good, excellent. Yeah, that's perfect.
But yeah, I think it's, for me, it is absolutely that life doesn't have to be ruled by disaster. We can live a life by design, and it's a choice. It really is a choice.
Cool, I like that. Laura, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
Hopefully this was actually live at some point, but I do know it's going to go on a recording, and so we'll find it somewhere on the web. Let's say goodbye to our LinkedIn Live audience at this point, if there is one. But if you don't mind, could you hang on the call after I disconnect this from the live? I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith.